Welcome back. We will now go into the next session, which is XML validation. What do we mean by XML validation? So far, all the scenarios that we've dealt with, you've realized one thing. PI deals with XML messages. Now, in this case so far, if you remember, in one of the, when we were doing the session on monitoring, we had changed the format of the date and you got an error that told, hey, the date message format is incorrect. But what if you wanted to do that validation even before the message went into the mapping layer? What you do not want, what you would like to do is that, hey, I don't want the mapping to get executed if the message does not conform to the standard that I have asked it to conform. So, that kind of validation or XML is what is called XML validation. So all messages in PI can be validated against their data types and or against their external definitions or DTDs in the enterprise service repository. Basically, PI can do an XML validation. It is an out-of-the-box functionality. In PI 7.1 and in PI 7.11, when this functionality was newly introduced, you had to do an extra step of exporting the XSD and then loading it into the file system of PI. In the version of PI 7.4 or even in PI 7.3, you need not do this step. PI, you just need to select, validate the XML message, and the validation will happen implicitly. Just remember that in PI 7.1 and in PI 7.11, you need to do an extra step of exporting the structure and storing it locally. Okay. When the processing of the message happens, you can validate the message both in the adapter engine and in the integration engine. Okay, and where do you activate it? You activate the validation in the collaboration agreement. What is a collaboration agreement? The collaboration agreement is nothing but a sender agreement, receiver agreement, or your integrated configuration is your collaboration agreement. Okay, so XML validation can be done both in the integration engine and in the advanced adapter engine. That's the only thing that I wanted to repeat in this slide. It is supported for both asynchronous and synchronous interfaces. So we will be looking at doing XML validation for both asynchronous and synchronous steps. So what we're going to do in terms of hands-on in this is the file-to-file scenario and the SOAP to RFC scenario that we have built. We will be using both the classical configuration and the integrated configuration and doing our XML validation. Okay, so let's get started. So for the XML validation, let's close all objects. I'm going to my first scenario, which was my file-to-file scenario. All right. Okay, awesome. Now it's responding. Okay, this was my file-to-file scenario. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my sender agreement. This is my sender agreement. I'm going to go into my sender agreement and you see this schema validation. Now let's go ahead and say validation by the adapter. Okay, I'm saying schema before I do anything. Okay, let's say schema validation by the adapter. And let's go ahead and activate our change. Okay, so what have I done? I've gone to the sender agreement of my file-to-file scenario, the existing file-to-file scenario. For the schema validation, I've told validation by the adapter. Now let's go back to my directory and go back and upload my file. Right? Sorry. So I'm going to change this to say file-to-file.xml is going to be written as file-to-file. Okay. This is a valid scenario. I have not made any changes to my file, to my input file. So in this case, we should expect that the file gets processed successfully. Okay, so let's go up the chain. I see the file-to-file.xml is here. So let's refresh. Remember, the polling interval is 1 minute, so it might take some time. In the meantime, let's open the communication channel, right? So this is my file to file sender communication channel. I'm going to my communication channel monitoring. That's not open, so I'm going to my monitoring app. I'm going to communication channel monitor, and I'm going to this channel and saying go. Right, let's see now if the file has been picked up. Yes, the file has been picked up. Right, now let's go into the audit log, and if I scroll down here at the bottom, do I see the hyperlink? No. So let's refresh one more time. Let's say go. Yeah, I see the hyperlink here because the message had get processed. Let's go in here. And now let's go to my audit log, right? I scroll down, I go to my message log. It's also, message log is nothing but audit log as well. So I go here, I see, if you look at it, validation for message with message ID. So there's a validation that happened, right? Now, once the validation happened, only then the message gets deleted, saying it is valid file. If you see here, validation of message successful, and hence after which the file got deleted. Now let's go in here and let's edit the file. Okay, now I'm going to remove the first name. The first name is a mandatory field if you remember the data type definition. So I've removed my first name, and now let's go ahead and upload the file one more time. I upload the file got uploaded. I go into this directory. Let's just make sure the file does not have the first name. Yes, it does not have the first name. So now let's go in here to the communication channel, and because we do not want to wait 1 minute, I'm going to go in, just do a go first, see if anything news happen. No, I'm going to stop my channel and I'm going to start my channel. Okay, now I'm going to say go one more time. Voila, the message is error. If you see what is the error? Error because of XML validation. Error, XML validation exception. Let's click here. Yeah, invalid content type was file, last name instead of first name has come. Exactly what we were expecting. So the idea is PI's PI's validation is pretty good, where PI will immediately tell you what has happened and why the message had failed. Right. So now if I go here, the file will continue to be here because the validation has happened. And sorry. One minute. I'm going here and I refresh. So if you look at it, the file continues to be here. Why? Because of the fact that the validation is happening in the adapter engine, and the adapter engine is not going to process it because the file is invalid. So now let's go ahead to the sender agreement and change the validation as validation by integration engine. Okay, I'll save this sender agreement and I'm activating it. In this case, now what's going to happen is the file is still an error file, but the file is going to be deleted and the message is going to error in SXMB Moni to say, hey, the file has errored because the validation failed. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my communication channel monitor. I'm going to go stop and I'm going to go start. Now if I say go, now you see the channel status is in green and the message got processed in the adapter engine. Now if I go into SXMB Moni, we will see a failure. Yes, the failure, and if you see the error, XML validation error, because the PI message had missing data. If you see XML validation for payload failed, last of first name is expected. First name is expected, but I've sent the last name. So this is the beauty of XML validation. You can do the validation either in the adapter engine level or you can do the validation at the integration engine level. So now let's go ahead and fix the file. I'm just copying this and pasting it here. And saving it. And I'm going to upload the file again. Okay, let's upload the file. So I'm going into my SAP, upload the file, so that at least we now will see that the message gets processed successfully. Okay. I have too many exmonies, and now I go here. Go in here, refresh. In the next 1 minute the file should get picked up. Let's wait for the file to get picked up. While the file is getting picked up, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my enterprise service repository, ESR. I'm going to close all, and within my ESR now I'm going to go into my mapping. Let's go to my file to file scenario. And I'm going to disable my mapping for the name field. So what I'm telling is the name field is not going to come in the source. When the mapping gets executed, the name field has been disabled. What I did, I right clicked and disabled field. Now once I disable the field, there is going to be a problem when the mapping gets executed. The mapping will execute, but the name field will not be there. And then I'm going to do a validation. So when the validation happens, it's going to fail after that. Okay, so before we do that, now let's refresh. Okay, so this message was successful because this was before the mapping change. Okay, I go to inbound message, payload, main document, right click, display content in window 1, and I see the message, and then I go to technical routing, payload, and I say display content in window 2, right? And this is okay. Now let's go ahead, upload the file one more time. One file has disappeared. Now I'm going to go in, uploading the file. The file has been uploaded. Now let's go into the directory, see if the file is available here. Yes, the file is available. I don't want to wait for 1 minute, so I'm going to go into my communication channel monitor, stop my message, stop my channel, and start my channel. Okay, so now if I go into SXMB Moni, I will still see a successful message. Even though I disabled my mapping, you see this is successful. Even though I disabled so let's look at the input message. Why do I see an input message at this John? I go to technical routing, payload, display content in window 2, and you see the name field is not there, but yet it failed. It was successful. Why? Because the XML validation is only done for the sender agreement. The XML validation was not enabled for the receiver agreement. So let's go ahead and open our receiver agreement. You see now this is our receiver agreement, and you see this option called schema validation, and we haven't selected validation by integration engine. Okay, so here make sure you select the software component, Z training software component, and once you do that, okay, let me explain this again. Right, the reason that the message was successful was because we have only enabled the schema validation in the integration engine or in the adapter engine on your sender agreement, but the schema validation should also be done on the receiver agreement. So go into the receiver agreement. First thing you would need to do is go to your software component or receiver interface drop down and select your software component. Once you select your software component, select the option validation by integration engine. By default, this will not be selected, and hence this button is disabled. So select the software component of receiver interface, select your software component, and then say validation by integration engine. Now save your object, save your receiver agreement, activate my change list, activated my change list, and now I'm going to upload the file again. And when I upload the file again, I'm going to start my channel again. I don't want to wait for 1 minute. The other way is to obviously increase the polling, but then I don't like reducing the polling interval, because then the server can have issues when the polling interval is too small. Right? Now I've done that. Let's go into SXMB Moni. I'm going back and I'm refreshing, and I should see an error. Now you see refreshing XML validation has failed. And now if you see at which step the XML validation has failed, it has failed after the mapping, right? If you see technical routing, payload, display content in window 1, yes, the mapping got executed. You see the first name, the names is missing, and then after that the mapping got, the XML validation executed, and it told that, hey, the name field is missing. So if I look at the first step here, the previous error message, the XML validation occurred in the first step. So the idea is now the XML validation is happening for both the input message was validated here, and the output message also gets validated. So in terms of XML validation, you need to remember that XML validation can be enabled at either the sender agreement level or at the receiver agreement level, and XML validation will also tell you whether you want to do in your sender agreement, you can tell whether the validation has to happen in the adapter level or in the integration engine level. If you say the validation has to happen in the adapter engine level, the error message or the error file will never get picked up by PI, and in that case, the source system would, it is out of the scope of PI to process the error. Once you say validation by the integration engine, the error gets populated into PI, and then the error message fails in PI, and that typically is what we call forward error handling. Even though the error is in the source, you are handling it in PI, and you're going to build in an error handling framework within PI. Okay, so this was for classical configuration. Now let's look at asynchronous scenarios, classical configuration. Similarly, let's look at our file-to-file scenario, but for the ICO. Now in the ICO, you do not have the concept of sender agreement and receiver agreement, right? But you have the concept of inbound processing and outbound processing. So now what you can do is select validation by adapter. So as seen in the integrated configuration, you have options to do the validation. You have to do the validation both at the inbound processing and at the outbound processing. The inbound processing, if you remember our previous session, is equivalent to the sender agreement, and the outbound processing is equivalent to the sender agreement. The other thing to remember is that in the schema validation, in the inbound processing, in the classical configuration, you have the option to do validation by adapter and validation by the integration engine. Whereas in the case of integrated configuration, because you do not have the concept of an integration engine or an ABAP stack, the validation will have to happen at the adapter layer only. So in the inbound processing, I select validation by adapter, and in the outbound processing, I have selected validation by the adapter. I save my integrated configuration, and now I'm activating my integrated configuration, right? And now I'm going to go ahead and upload my file, right? But before I upload my file, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to remove the first name here. Okay, I removed my first name. Now I go into and I upload my file. So my file has been uploaded. Now let's go to my communication channel. You see, we already have the error. Invalid content found because the first name field is missing. Right? Now what am I going to do? I'm going to go in, add the content here into the file. I'm going to save my file, and once I've saved my file, I'm going back into my screen and I'm uploading my file. Yes, I say please overwrite the file, and the file got overwritten. Now I'm going to communication channel monitor. I say stop my communication channel. I say start the channel again. I say go, and now the file got processed successfully. Right? So that's what is validation by the adapter. Now if you see here in the message monitor logs, attempting to send an XML message, the message validation was successful. Again, if I keep coming down after the mapping, validation was successful. Right? Now let's go in and change the mapping. The same thing that we did in our enterprise service repository for the file to file scenario, file to file ICO, message mapping, disable the name field. Okay, I've disabled the name field. I'm saving my mapping, and I'm going to go in and activate my mapping. And now that I've activated my mapping, I'm going into my directory, refreshing. There should be no file. Yes, I'm now going into my SAP screen here and uploading my file again. Now the file is going to get picked up, but the file will have a mapping error because of the fact that the file was not processed. Right? Let's see what happens. Right? So I go into communication channel monitor. I say go. Let's see if the file got processed. No. So I'm going to say stop. I'm going to say start. Now I say go. So the file got picked up. Let's see in AL11 what happened. The file got picked up. Now if I go into the message monitor, sorry, let's close the screen and let's close this screen. So I'm clicking on this hyperlink to lead me to the message, and you see the message is in a status called waiting. Why is it in a status called waiting? It should typically be in the status called delivered. The waiting state is because the validation has failed. If we go to the message log, the mapping got executed, and now if you see, here we go, XML validation has failed, invalid content is present in my message. Okay, does that make sense? It does, doesn't it? The fact that the mapping has been disabled, which meant it went through. So now let's do one thing. We know, so in PI there's this concept of message status, right? A message that is failed, a message that has a waiting state will get automatically retried 3 times at an interval of 5 minutes. Right? So in the next 5 minutes, let's go in and revert our mapping change. Right? Now I'm going in, I'm enabling this field, right? And I'm saving this and activating. So basically I've reverted the change so that my validation will be successful. Now my message has been validated, and now let's restart this message and see what happens. So I'm selecting this message and I'm saying resend. Say OK. And now do you see it is successful? The beauty being, once I restarted the message, now if you go down into the scroll down the log, the message was set at wait. Now if you look at the audit log and watch carefully, admin action, try to resend the message. Trying to retry message due to an administrative action. Because I told retry, the message was retried, resent, the message was retried, the mapping got executed again, and now because the mapping got executed again, and because I've reverted my mapping change, now the output has the field name, and because the output has the field name, everything went well. So if you now open this message, let's open this message. Okay. Sorry, here we haven't gotten the logs enabled to see the output of your mapping, which is why you can't see the output of the mapping. But at this point, suffice to say that restarting the message has re-triggered the mapping, and because the mapping has been fixed, everything is hunky-dory, and now the message got delivered. Okay, so far we've done the validation for asynchronous messages. So XML validation, we validated it for classical configuration on both the adapter engine and the integrated engine, and we've done XML validation for integrated configuration. Now let's go ahead and do it for a SOAP to RFC scenario. This is basically our synchronous scenario, right? So I'm now going into our SOAP to RFC. I'm going into the classical configuration. I'm going into my sender agreement. Sorry, this is my interface determination. Okay, now I'm in my sender agreement, and I'm going to say validation by the adapter. Okay, and then I'm going to go in and activate my sender agreement. I've activated my sender agreement, and after I've activated my sender agreement, I'm going to my SOAP UI, and I'm going to my SOAP to RFC scenario here, and I'm going to execute it. Right, it will be successful. Here we go. That's the first error that's come. There is an XML validation issue, and this is the error. What does it say? Let's look at it. This was not what I was expecting as well, but let's look at it collectively. The routing exception, validation of payload with routes SI OS SOAP to RFC, target namespace encountered during parsing is not complete. One of cache results activity groups is expected. If you look at, let's open the structure now. Right, if I open the BAPI structure, what the BAPI is saying is one of them is mandatory, not the user existence check. We are dealing with BAPI user get details. SOAP to RFC, imported objects, BAPI user get detail. What SAP PI is telling me is one of them has to be provided. So let's look at the mapping. SOAP to RFC. Let's look at the occurrence of each of these messages. Username is 1:1, and everything else out here is 0:1. Okay, you see this return structure, that is 1:1. But we had not populated it, and as a result of which PI has rejected it. You see this return is 1:1. So let's go in here and type in return. That's it, right? Within return, this is optional, the item is optional, but PI is saying, hey, this return element is mandatory, you did not send me this mandatory. Let's see if there's something else like that. Nothing else, so let's execute it. And what has happened now? And now the response is successful. So this is the beauty of PI again. In this case, now we've triggered the validation at the adapter engine level, and hence the message was so if do we expect in SXMB Moni any failures? So I'm going to SXMB Moni. This is my previous message. I'm refreshing it, and you see this is the successful message. And now if I look at the request message that came in, it will have the return structure, right? Now let's do the validation at the integration engine level. I'm activating it. I'm going in here and I'm removing the return. I'm just doing a Control X and executing it. Again, there is an exception, and the exception says synchronous messages can only be validated by the adapter. This is an incorrect configuration in PI. Okay, I wanted to show you this error message. So when we are dealing with synchronous messages, the validation of synchronous messages can only happen at the adapter engine level. They cannot be done at the integration engine level. Okay, again, this is stuff that you do by learn by trial and error. So in this case, we enabled it at the integration engine level, but the message came up, synchronous messages can only be enabled by the adapter, incorrect configuration. So I fixed the configuration, back to the adapter engine. Now I'm executing it, and again I get the message saying return is expected. I put the return, I execute this, and I get a valid successful response. Okay, now let's go ahead and do the validation now for the integrated configuration. So the same SOAP to RFC integrated configuration, I'm going in here and I'm saying validation by adapter. Okay, and I'm activating. I go back to my SOAP UI. I go to my ICO scenario. This is my SOAP to RFC with ICO. Okay, and now I execute. And here there is no problem at all. Now I'm going to remove the username. I'm doing a Control X of the username. Sorry. I'm doing a Control X of the username and now executing. And I get an error saying the content of the element mapping username is not existed. One of the is not complete. One of the field username is expected. Okay. Now let's go into the integrated configuration. And go to the outbound processing and enable validation. No, let it be like that. Let's go to the message mapping. SOAP to RFC ICO. Okay, we'll first deal with the request, then we will look at the response separately. Okay, I go here and I disable this field. Now that I've disabled this, I'm going to go into message mapping and I'm going to activate my mapping. Now that I've disabled this, what's going to happen? There is going to be an error, but the error is now going to be triggered in the receiver SOAP adapter. Okay, so I go in here now and I say execute again. Okay, did I disable it for the right field? PIP username existence check, yes. User existence check. Okay, the idea is, sorry, while I disabled it here, I did get a response, and the response is the user does not exist. There's no username. Why did it? So in this case, PI's mapping has a problem, but then we have not enabled the schema validation in the adapter in the outbound processing. Now I'm enabling it in the outbound processing, and once I enable it in the outbound processing, I'm going to activate it, right? And once I activate this, I should now get an error. I should now get an error I'm now going to trigger the message. I got an error saying the content is not complete. Username field is expected. Okay, excellent. Now I'm going to enable this field again. And now that I've enabled this field, I'm going into operation mapping. I'm going to activate it, and then I'm going to my response mapping. Let's first actually activate it and make sure that the response comes back clean. Right? Activate and close. Okay. And perfect, user does not exist. Now the last thing, ideally in this case, if I had returned, none of the fields in the response are mandatory, so I cannot induce an error in the response mapping. But if I had disabled, let's assume that this was 1:1, the occurrence was mandatory, and I had disabled it and I had triggered the message, again there would be an error saying the XML validation has failed. Okay, so the beauty of PI's XML validation is that it's just a click of a button, and once you press the click of the button, you would be able to perform your XML validation. And always remember, the XML validation has to be performed, enabled at both the inbound processing layer and at the outbound processing layer in an ICO, and in a sender agreement and in a receiver agreement in the case of a classical. Okay, the last bit about XML validation. Like I mentioned, in PI 7.1 and PI 7.11, there was a requirement that you had to upload the XSD manually. But how does it happen in PI 7.3? Where is this XSD stored, right? So go into your PI monitoring homepage, go into adapter engine, and look here for the cache monitor, right? Cache monitor is nothing but the monitor where you can see all the objects that are persisted in the cache. Every time you activate an object, the object gets pushed into the memory, and that's called the cache of PI, right? Now go to PI monitoring homepage, go to adapter engine, go to your cache monitor, and within your cache monitor, go to mapping runtime. And when you go within mapping runtime, go to this tab called XML schema. All right. So the way to do it, let's close it and do it one more time. Go to your PI monitoring, go to adapter engine, and within adapter engine, click on cache monitor. Within cache monitor, go to mapping runtime, and in the mapping runtime, there's this last tab called XML schema. Right? For all the interfaces where you've enabled XML schema, wherever you've enabled XML validation, the moment you enable XML validation, you will be able to see the XSD being created and persisted in the PI, into the PI server in the memory here. So PI uses this to validate your object. Now what if you change the structure, right? What if you change the structure? How do you refresh or synchronize from the ESR? So what that means is, let's go into the data type here. And the first name field, instead of it being 1:1, I say, hey, it is no more mandatory. I'm going to make it 0:1, right? I'm saving it and I'm activating it. So I've gone to my data type, and instead of it being a mandatory field, I've gone in and I'm making the first name as 0:1 instead of 1:1. And in my mapping, I had not enabled the name again, the name mapping again. So let's go ahead and do that. Enable field. Okay. Save. Activate. Okay. So now the last step is, I'm going to go here in my file to file scenario and enable the validation at the adapter engine layer. So I go to my sender agreement and make it validation by adapter. So what have I done? Basically, I know we've done a lot of changes. Basically, in my file-to-file scenario, I've made the I have made sure that the validation is done by the adapter. That's the first step. The validation is happening by the adapter. Then I made the data type change such that the data type is now going to use the DT underscore target. And now if I execute file to file, okay, now let me go in and edit my file to file. And remove the first name. So in this case, let's see what happens. So there, what's going on? In my data type, my first name is no more mandatory. It's 0 to 1, and I've told that my validation has to happen at the adapter engine layer. So now I've uploaded my file. My file does not have a first name, which means that when I go into my communication channel monitor, my file should not now get picked up and get processed. Go. Okay. Is there anything that happened? No, the file is still here. So I'm going to stop my channel, I'm going to start my channel, and now let's say go again, and my file got processed successfully. Now let's revert the change back, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to make my data type as again mandatory. And I'm activating my channel data type. Now that my data type has changed, let's see what happens again. I'm going to upload the file again. My input file still does not contain the first name field. So I'm uploading the file, and now that I'm uploading the file, it should ideally it should not get processed, but it will get processed. And for this I will tell you why, and there's an additional step that needs to happen. Let's look at it. Stop the channel, start the channel, say go, and my file got processed. The reason is my cache has not been updated. What I need to do is every time I change my data type, I need to synchronize from the ESR. Okay, so let's find the service interface name and say resynchronize from the ESR. So I'm going to go in here. This is my service interface name, SIOA SRC, right? I'll just type it out. So I'm going to say SIOA underscore SRC. There are two ways to get it resynchronized again. I can either reactivate the sender agreement, or I can say synchronize from the enterprise service repository. So I'm saying synchronize from the enterprise service repository. This has now been synchronized, and now if I come here, the first name should become mandatory. Okay. Alright, now let's go in, upload the file again. File has been uploaded, and start my channel again. Stop, start, go, error because the first name has not been updated. Now again, let's just go in to the data type and make the first name again non-mandatory. Right? I'm going to go in here, say hey, I want to make it a 0:1. I say OK, I save and I activate. Now even when I go into my communication channel, it would still say it is mandatory. Even though I made it non-mandatory here, it will still say that it is non-mandatory. So it is at 22:07. Let's stop. Let's get it to pull the file again. It's taking too long. Yeah, 22:07. Start. 22:08. Go. Again at 22:08 it has failed. Now let's do a resynchronization. So you have two options. I can either say select the service interface and synchronize from the ESR, or I can make a dummy change to my sender agreement and activate. Right? When I activate the sender agreement, it will automatically load the XSD. But if you don't want to do that, you can just directly say synchronize from the ESR. Okay, let's just change this because the screen is not refreshing. Okay. I say synchronize from the ESR, and now that it is synchronized, I go to my communication channel monitor, I stop my channel, I start my channel, and I say go one more time, and now you see the message has been processed successfully. The reason being, every time you change it, the data type structure, and you change it, you need to manually go in and synchronize the cache with the enterprise service repository. Okay, so with that we come to the end of our session for XML validation. XML validation is an out-of-the-box feature of PI. You can enable XML validation either at the adapter engine level or at the integration engine level for classical configurations. You can, but for integrated configuration, you only can do it in the integrated configuration, and you can do it at either the inbound processing or at the outbound processing. The other important thing being that we saw was every time you make a change to your data type, if there is something that changes in the underlying data type, you need to go into your cache. And how do you go there? Go to your adapter engine, go to your cache monitor, go to mapping runtime, go to XML schema. There give your service interface name and then synchronize it from the ESR, and immediately your change will start getting reflected. With this we come to our end of our session on XML validation, and I shall see you soon in the next session. Bye bye.